Rising stock prices will have more Americans picking their feet.
Rising stock prices means that more Americans will be picking at their toes?
More Americans will be picking their feet with devices such as this as stock prices rise. Giddy up. Welcome to the Knock-On Effect, the show that starts with the thing you know and ends up, here you go, in a strange place. I'm Alex Rosenberg, joined as always by everyone's top pick, the co-host with the mo-host, Justine Underhill.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And by the man who always lands on his feet, our historical oracle, the professor himself, Roger Hurst.
Thanks very much, Alex.
All right. So after today's main segment, Justine's going to tell us about a number that rarely shows up in earnings reports in our new segment, What's Your Number? But first, Justine, Roger and I are going to try to get you from rising stock prices to people using these things.
This looks a little bit like intense or like an industrial thing to use on your foot.
Sure. We'll learn all about it, and we're going to try to get you from there to here. With that being said, would you like to hazard an early guess?
Why rising stock prices?
Yes.
Okay. Rising stock prices means that people will feel more wealthy.
Great.
And so they will start investing in maybe themselves and in new things. And so maybe they start realizing that their feet are dirty. So they use foot picks. This makes no sense to me.
No, it's fine. It's fine. Would you give that a grade, Roger?
No.
Well, I think it's fair to say, Justine, that you were really fumbling around in the dark there. So at this stage, I don't think you've even got a basic grade,
I was grabbing at straws.
Yes. Fair enough. Speaking of straws, that's a whole different knock-on effect with Starbucks. But so you are mistaken. It's no secret that stock prices have been rising. So if you've owned stocks for the past 9 years, good job. I don't want to get into exactly why they've been rising. Definitely don't want to get into whether they'll continue to rise. Just want to sort of set that off for now and move on to the first knock-on effect, which is income inequality. So Professor, I'll just bit of a leading the witness question, but if stock prices rise further, will the rich get even more so?
I think the answer to that is absolutely yes. The top 1% of US citizens own 40% of all shares. The top 20% own 92% of all shares. And I think the middle class, so the majority of Americans, own only around about 8%. So I think it's very clear that if share prices are going up, it's a very small number who really benefit, and therefore income inequality is only going to rise. And let's throw that into the mix with also that the CEOs of the largest companies earn 271 times more than the average employee at those companies. So really, this does show that income inequality from share prices.
Right. I was always surprised by the stat to find out like how many Americans don't own any stock or aren't invested in the stock market.
Yeah, I mean, it makes intuitive sense, right? A lot of Americans don't have a lot of spare money. So if you have money to spare, might invest in the stock market. The more money you have to spare, the more you invest in the market. The more the market goes up, right, the better it is for. I mean, it's a bit reductive in a way because the stock market is also just measuring the profits that adhere to owners of capital. So it's sort of tautological. But if you just isolated a stock market rising in of itself, you would say that if you looked at a country, let's say Fredonia's stock market has risen for the past 10 years, it's probably been good news for Fredonia's rich, and it's been probably meant a widening of income inequality.
Yes. I mean, you would think that as stock prices went up, maybe companies might pass some of those gains on to the workers, but that hasn't necessarily been the case.
It certainly hasn't. And
in terms of wage increases.
And Roger, you have some interesting stats about what's happened to both stocks and income inequality in the United States since the late 70s.
In fact, we have seen this incredible imbalance, this great inequality, really picking up since the 1970s, and it is largely to do with shares. And I think the big giveaway here is that it really kicked off in 1982, and this was the beginning of the great bull market in US equities. So from 1982, maybe even till today, we've seen this inequality only get wider and wider. Obviously, that's being driven or partly driven by the shares and the amount of equity that the rich people own. But also we've seen a suppression of wages. And some would argue that we've seen this massive increase in the C-suite pay and this maintenance of high levels of profit margin, largely at the expense of workers. Their wages have fallen or at least stayed static in real terms, whilst the C-suite have paid themselves more and more in shares, and those shares have gone up at a faster pace than GDP, giving them this absolute boon benefit that the rich have gained over the average worker.
Right. And just, I'd be remiss if we didn't mention the Fed here at some point, because higher stock prices to produce more wealth for the wealthy has actually been seen arguably as a policy goal. So I'm going to read, going way back in time to 2010, when Fed Chair Ben Bernanke, then Fed Chair, of course, wrote in a 2010 Washington Post op-ed, and I quote, "Higher stock prices will boost consumer wealth and will help increase confidence, which can also spur spending. Increased spending will lead to higher incomes and profits that, in a virtuous circle, will further support economic expansion."
And that's one of the biggest complaints about the Fed, or one of them, which is that it does, in some ways, increase income inequality.
So he's not targeting income inequality, obviously,
Right,
and the Fed has talked about income inequality and the issues with that. But if you target higher stock prices, you are going to encourage income inequality.
Right, or just even the process of quantitative easing, how that works, how it goes to the banks, how everything, the whole policy works, also kind of exacerbates that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, is it still the best policy goal? Is it worthy enough that it's worth the extra income inequality? That's a whole thing I don't want to get into. Instead, I want to talk about pets.
Pets?
Yes, pets, those things that millennials love instead of children. So according to a 2017-2018 study done by the American Pet Products Association, more than half of American households have a pet, the most popular being dogs, followed by cats, birds, kind of goes down from there.
As a fellow millennial, do you have a pet?
You know, I'm sadly, it's a sad situation. I'm between pets now, but I probably will have a cat or two soon. Do you have any pets?
No, I'm part of the other 50% of millennials that don't have a pet.
Yes. So we could talk about.
I have succulents. Those are my pets.
Don't. Those are plants, right? For those at home.
But they are my babies.
What are their names?
Harris and Teeter.
Did you just make that up?
Yes.
Okay, good. That's relieving. So instead of talking about popularity, though, we're going to talk about income and money, and that's why I want Scott Exhibit A, if you would be so kind. Thank you. Wow, with the sunglasses too. So here are all the kinds of pets that Americans own, and what I want you to do, is to order them from the incomes of their owners, from the highest income to the lowest income.
I'm going to put horse as the highest, absolutely.
Okay.
Because those are expensive. I'm going to put bunny rabbit at the end. Toucan? Is that actually a toucan or is it bird? It represents bird.
Yeah.
Okay. Snake. I'm going to put snake at the bottom, actually. I don't know why. This is just based on nothing. I bet you dog people actually have quite a bit of money.
So this is not just rabbits. This is small animals, by the way. Oh. And this isn't just snakes. This is all reptiles.
Reptiles. I'm still putting reptiles. But you have to feed them live things, which is a little more difficult. I'm gonna put rodents down here.
Rodents?
I love.
Oh, but don't call a rabbit a rodent. That's messed up.
Okay. Well, it includes gerbils and everything. I had a gerbil.
Okay, so we're going horse, dog, cat, bird, reptiles, small animals. You're right on the horse.
Uh-oh.
Interestingly, it actually goes horse,
bird,
then dog, then small animals.
Okay.
Then cats, then reptiles.
Actually, I see that case. Oh, that's a nice little ascending.
It's an ascending triangle there. A little technical analysis. So that's the income order. There are other interesting demographic facts in this report, by the way. Would you be surprised to learn that the owners of cats and reptiles have lower rates of marriage than the overall population?
I am not surprised.
Me neither. So let's get back to horses, though, because they are our next knock-on effect. My theory is that since they are owned by people with the highest incomes, as the rich get richer, more people are liable to buy horses. They're owned by the highest income for a reason. They're incredibly expensive to maintain. You have to get them a lot of land. And just the costs are completely out of whack.
You're going to have people looking for more victory gallops.
Yeah, so that's the other thing, by the way. A callback is as the racehorses, racehorses prices are rising as well. But in terms of recreational horses, like if you wanted to feed a dog for a year, probably cost you about $200. Horse will cost you $2,000 a year to feed. boarding, stable help, each of those over $2,000 a year. And actually, I was talking to someone around, if you want to board a horse near New York City, it'll cost you around $2,000 a month.
Ouch.
Yeah. And that's before we get into all the horse accoutrement, if you will.
Oh, fancy.
So there are, saddles and bridles and helmets that are all very expensive. There are, this, which has been on the desk, is actually believe it or not, is a salt lick.
Oh.
It's an extremely fancy salt lick, though, made from Himalayan sea salt, made in Vermont. So this is like fancier than the salt that humans use.
Like really for fancy horses.
Yeah, and then we also have exhibits B and C, if you would be so kind, Scott. These are all things that I bought literally a block from here at a place called Manhattan Saddlery.
Oh my God.
This is a sweat wiper that if you wash a horse, you're supposed to take off the sweat. This I really like. This is a fly guard.
Oh my God.
This is really expensive.
So this is for all these bougie horses.
Yes, this is for the Manhattan horses, if you will. This is to kind of keep the flies off of your head.
That's good color for you.
And this is
A horse pick.
That's right.
And I recognized that I was thinking that this looked like something for a horse or like the hooves.
That's right. So before or after you ride your horse, you got to pick out the dirt. I feel like I'm starting to give a tutorial like a home improvement thing, but you pick out the dirt and then you brush it away.
I'm actually experienced in this.
Are you?
I did this as a kid, yeah. I would sweep horse poop and I'd pick their shoes.
Did you own a horse?
I did not own a horse. I went to stables though. So
very nice.
I'm skilled in horseback riding.
Very good. So we've unfortunately already we've arrived because higher stock prices, more income inequality, more horses,
Yes.
and more people picking the feet, specifically hooves of the feet of the horses they own.
So have we already seen sales of horses going up?
You know what? Here's the problem. Horse sales, horses are dealing with a big economic problem. U.S. horse ownership probably peaked in the first decade of the 20th century before something called the car became very popular.
Yes.
And as more Americans move to cities, horse ownership has fallen dramatically. But I've actually, and actually, by the way, the sort of bolstering my point, the recession was very, very bad for horse ownership, since horses are almost like yacht boats. They're like a really discretionary thing that you might buy, right?
A luxury good. Yeah.
Yes, and so I've seen predictions that horse ownership trails the overall stock market by about 3 years. So since stocks have been rising, horse ownership might go up on the margins again. And as I always say, the show could be called On the Margins, because in the long run, I'm not betting on people, like a lot of Americans owning horses anytime soon, no matter how high stocks rise.
I wonder if there's a way you could trade this, like maybe investing in like horse shops.
Yeah, I mean, this place, Manhattan Saddlery, was doing good business. But I mean, there's a lot of people are caring for their horses. Horse dental care has been very popular.
So veterinary cares.
Yeah.
And actually, I would say that a lot of pets are luxury items. And so in that case, veterinarians would do quite well.
Well, this guy's not an item. I mean, look how cute.
He's so cute.
But yes, I that's completely true. And millennials, I joke that I made that joke about kids, but in all seriousness, as millennials put off having kids, a lot of people with double incomes are just, adopting a dog. More and more dogs and cats are sleeping in beds with their owners. And so people are just paying more and more for their pets. They see it as part of the family, and veterinary bills and all these sorts of veterinary medicines. It's actually a really hot field right now.
Huh, that's interesting.
Roger, you strike me as someone who might have picked the foot of a horse every now and then.
Oh, there are more than enough young people on the estate who will do that for me, so I don't need to get my hands dirty, fortunately.
Are you, in all seriousness, do you own horses? Have you ever owned a horse?
No, surprisingly, given that this is the county that has the headquarters of English horse racing up at Newmarket, and this is also the land of the Suffolk Punch, it's very rare that you'll ever see me on a horse, and in fact, I'd probably fall off if they went at any pace, so I try and avoid them.
But I do want to back this up a little bit and look at the bigger picture here,
Please.
because what you do bring up is a very important point, which is income inequality. And that's something that, as we mentioned before, the Fed has in some ways exacerbated You can make that claim at least. And that's something that the Fed's going to have to come to terms with at some point. Because, what are the consequences? We've had this massive stimulus that we've never seen before. We've had really low rates. And so what are the implications of that we haven't fully realized yet? And so this is going to come in so many different forms. I mean, the horse is a wonderful example of this, but there's a lot of other things that we're going to start to see and policies that we're going to have to start to come to terms with in the near future.
And I think the key question around income inequality in the Fed is, have the Fed's actions of making rates lower than they would have been otherwise, has that directly helped the stock market, which helped the economy, or has that helped the economy, which helps the stock market?
I need to say a little bit of both.
Of course.
Yes.
But that's really what you have to negotiate. Is this basically just another boon for the wealthy, just like tax cuts, or is this something that it helps out everyone? So obviously, and any policy that helps the economy is going to help the wealthy disproportionately. Well, I shouldn't say any, because you could imagine just handing out $500 to everybody, but most policies. So figuring that out is actually really important for how we assess the job the Fed has done over the past decade, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I think if we're absolutely honest, the intention when Bernanke set out down this route of inflating the stock market, he genuinely thought it was going to benefit a large number of people. But unfortunately, it just didn't work out that way. We've very clearly seen that the wealthy have got wealthier. And in the same way that they probably intended to create inflation, but didn't, they probably created deflation of all things apart from asset prices. I think that intention to create an inflation of wages, an inflation of wealth effect from high stock markets, it just didn't work out. But the intention was good, but the actual finished product was left wanting.
Yeah, it's bad for the snake owner and good for the horse owner. But before we ride off into the sunset here, Justine, you are bringing us our new segment.
Yes, we have a new segment today, and it's called What's Your Number?
914.
No, I don't want your number.
Great.
No, thank you. Our special number today is the number 4.
Okay.
Okay, and this is actually about the case of the missing 4. So there are missing 4s in earnings reports. And so the mystery is, why is this? Okay, so I also want to make the case that a missing 4 in an earnings report from companies, specifically an earnings per share, means that this was a company that you probably want to stay away from. Okay. So a lot of this is based on this paper. It's a paper called Quadrophobia.
Love the name.
Strategic Rounding of EPS Data. It's quite a beautiful name. And so basically what these researchers did was they looked at over 25,000 companies between the years 1980 and 2013. And they found that, quote, underrepresentation of the number 4 in the first post-decimal digit of EPS data was apparent, or this is also what they call quadrophobia. So let me break that all down.
Please.
Okay. So basically, for example, if you have earnings per share and it's 13.4 cents, it would get rounded to 13 cents. That's what you would report.
Okay.
But if you have earnings per share of 13.5 cents, that gets rounded up to 14 cents.
Oh my God.
So a lot of companies have a pretty strong incentive to...
Because just by 1/10 of a penny.
1/10 of a penny, just to change that, to get that up to 0.5 so that they can round up.
Wow.
And so if they have 0.3, they're not necessarily going to try to get it to 0.5. But if they have 0.4, there's a huge incentive just to get that 1/10 of a cent up to 0.5 so that you can round up. And they actually found that the more coverage, the more scrutiny that there is on a stock, the more likely, or more analyst coverage, the more likely they are to have missing 4s in their earnings reports.
So as a naive person, I might ask, how is it possible you could add 1/10 of a penny on earnings?
Oh,
Isn't the whole quarter done? Aren't we just...
There's always ways. I mean, this gets into great accounting practices. There's always ways. It's not fudging the numbers. It's all true. It's all accurate. But maybe there were some expenses that you push over to the next quarter. Or maybe there's something that you do, and you can kind of... There's a little bit of what I like to call fudge room. And actually, before I get into this, I do want to bring up a chart. So we actually have a chart here. And this shows you the representation in earnings per share, how often fours come up in earnings reports, EPS reports. And you can see that the band is where is normal. And you can see it's pretty much since the 1980s, it's been well below that band.
Wow.
Okay. But now I want to get into what they call a quadrophobia score.
Okay.
So these researchers gave every single company the score based on how phobic they are of the number 4. And they actually found that it was associated with other issues with accounting practices. So the more likely a firm was to leave out a 4 just to try to like change its numbers to get it up to a 0.5, the more likely they were to engage in other fraudulent issues. So I'll have a quote here. Companies with high quadrophobia scores are, quote, significantly more likely to restate their financial statements, be named as defendants in SEC accounting and auditing enforcement releases, and be involved in class action securities fraud litigation. So so if you start noticing that a company hasn't reported a 13.4 in any of their earnings EPS statements, it could be a sign of other issues.
Are there companies today that fall into this bucket? Not
There
to call anyone out, but
there are historical examples. So this is not necessarily the case today, but the Wall Street Journal actually did a really lovely investigation.
Okay.
And they found that Dell, between 1988, which is when they first went public, and 2006, didn't have a single 4 in the 10th place of their earnings.
Between what, 1988 and
And
when?
2006. And the likelihood...
Only 16. It's what do you mean?
The likelihood of this happening by random chance
Yeah.
was 1 in 2,500.
Wait, but okay.
So that's unlikely.
So it's a period of almost 20 years.
Yes. They didn't have...
So it's one number out of 10 doesn't come up in 20 years. It could happen.
It's on every quarterly earnings report.
Oh, every quarter.
Yes.
Quarter. Thank you.
So that's very, very,
Yes.
very unlikely.
Thank you.
Anyway, so then also the SEC, they had to pay $100 million to settle SEC charges that they misled investors. This was in 2010.
But 4 is unlucky in China. Maybe they just didn't want to spook some people.
It is an unlucky number. But
Maybe it's unlucky for a reason because you have to round down.
Yeah.
Roger, what do you make of this?
There's clearly been a lot of crafty accounting going on over the years in most walks of life, but at the end of the day, it doesn't sound too bad, does it? 1/10 of a cent here or 1/10 of a cent there. I'm not that
Yeah,
worried.
right. And that's what it comes down to. They're not doing anything illegal. But now the SEC is actually...
Well, they are if they're moving forward expenses for revenue that they should have booked this quarter. I mean,
Things are... A lot of the companies that do this are doing it by the books. I mean, again, it doesn't take that much to make 1/10 of a cent difference. Yeah. But it is now become a signal for the SEC to investigate a company.
Yes.
And anyway, so that does it for this week's What's Your Number?
All right, 9-1. No.
No.
Okay. Yes, and that also does it for the knock-on effect this week. Thank you so much for joining us. We have a new episode every Thursday on Real Vision. We also address these topics in somewhat longer and banterier effect in our weekly podcast. You can find that on your podcast app under Real Vision Presents.
And if you want more on the markets and the economy, make sure you check out realvision.com/knock-on effect, where you can sign up for your 14-day free trial.
Yeah, plenty of good stuff there, plenty of new trade ideas, plenty of deeper dives into the economy, markets, all that good stuff. So check it out.
Yeah. See you guys next week. You want to try the salt lick?